Yo, what is up, everybody?
What up, what up, what up? Welcome back.
It's season 2, Pop.
Yep. Hey, season two, and we're ready to rock and roll with it. It's been a nice little break, and we were doing some things right during that break.
We definitely were doing some things. You can probably see, your boy looking like HD coming to you. Like you can see like every pimple and pore right now. You're probably like, yo, this is what he looks like for real.
Right.
But we're here. We upgraded, and before we get in to the conversation today, we have a really special guest.
We do. We
Maybe I
do.
should let Pop introduce our main man and the
Yes.
topic of the day.
Hey, you know what? This topic today is going to be a little heavy, but we're going to keep it real and 100. And yeah, it's an important conversation, I believe. And the gentleman that I run with a little bit, and we do some things together. Mad, muy inteligente, intelligent, drops knowledge all the time on me and helps me grow. We got Dr. Sherard Robbins with us today. So we're gonna talk about the N word. But before we get into all that and bring him in, hey, we got to show them the new little intro that we worked on.
It's season 2, baby. So we had it. We kept talking about it in season 1. We got to update it. We got to update it. So enjoy the new updated version of our intro. Here we go.
Here we go. What? Oh yeah. Bringing Dr. Sherard Robbins right in on that Up to It podcast.
Oh,
Welcome to the pod, Dr. Sherard Robbins.
I'm here, man. Appreciate y'all having me. Tough intro. Super tough, actually.
Yo, we
Thanks,
appreciate
man.
it.
Yeah, it didn't take too long to do that one, but it was fun. We had a good time with it.
Yeah,
That's what it's
it was a
about,
lot
man.
of fun.
It got
Yeah,
the point across for sure.
My Pop had some sticker shock though. He was like, "Yo, what? Not
Right.
what we doing with this? Okay, all right, we're here."
You know how it is, man. On the fly with it.
Always. So, hey, I don't want to take up, a lot of time and just chit chatting because I want to get into the meat of what we're here to talk about. Because, the reason this came up and using the N word is what we're talking about. The N word was, I got called into a school to work with some young people and an administration on a lot of words that were being used that are derogatory, degrading, racial slurs. And the main one was the N word that all these different young people are using. And interestingly enough, for me, it was, people of color also. So Black, Hispanic, Latinx. Um, and they were using the N word. And in addition to that, this generation, and throughout generation, right there, we're always using sometime, or they are using, and our generations have too, just derogatory, terms around LGBTQ and minorities in general, or people of color. So I went in and was doing some presentations about, just the importance of the words that we use and that words matter, and how we use them, especially when we're talking about derogatory terms. And so, I kind of talked to Dr. Robbins about it a little bit, like, hey man, what do you think? And so he gave me some feedback, and what was really interesting to me, and I brought it to Z again a couple of months ago, and was like, hey man, all these young people out here using the N word and dropping it left and right, and they don't understand that sometimes there's consequences to doing that. And what I mean is, hands being thrown, uh, people being expelled because of altercations because of this word. So I wanted to have a conversation about it here to see kind of where we land. And I think for me personally, it's I don't think it should be used. So, but I wanted to hear and have a conversation just about that, and bring in an expert as far as history, constitutional, uh, constitutional law, and just kind of where maybe all this started from. So, Z, I mean, what's your thoughts, and then maybe we'll get Dr. Robbins definitely to drop something.
Yeah, no, I was thinking. I mean, we were talking in the car in the truck. I was like, you know what? Like, as I'm getting older, I remember being younger. I used to use the N word a lot, like just because that was who I was around. I mean, that's the environment we were around. The club team would use it all the time and whatnot. So it just kind of became common language for me. But I also knew time and place. You know what I'm saying? Like time and place for when to use it, when not to use it, like and when to yell it or when not to yell it. I don't think I was actually yelling the N word out like that. And mind you, when I'm saying the N word, you know, I'm not saying the hard R, and that's what everybody, you know, I think definitely when somebody was saying the hard R, we were like, yo, whoa, that's out of pocket. You know what I mean? Even if it was another black person. But I noticed as I'm getting older that kind of just fell off my vocabulary. I don't even use that word anymore as I'm getting older and I'm maturing and I'm becoming this young man. You know what I mean? So yeah, I'm excited to hear what Dr. Robbins has to share with us today. And just I want to hear the history of the N word and how, you know, I hear a lot of things on Twitter, Instagram, Threads now, right? Like just us, the black community, trying to take that word back, but should we be taking it back? How do we feel about it? And just how did it all start? So I'm gonna give the floor back to Dr. Robbins and educate us. You know what I'm saying? Educate us a little bit.
Drop some knowledge.
No, I appreciate that perspective, man. I think a lot of black folks who came up in a particular time have an interesting relationship to that word. You mentioned this notion of the A and the hard R. And I challenge that, and I asked the question, what's really the difference at the end of the day? I remember years ago I had a student who was trying to course correct language she was using, and this is back when folks would liberally use the R word, retarded, at the particular point in time. And she goes, instead of using that word, I just now say the word Pop-Tart. But you mean the same thing.
Right.
So what really is the difference? If you mean to say what you're trying to say, you're just changing the word. You actually have never shifted your intent behind it. And so you know, you asked about the history, and you know, the history is nuanced, although relatively well documented. We know that the origins of the word come from the Latin niger, which just means black or to blacken. This goes back to the 16th century, and then it moves into, you know, the Spanish word negro or negro later on, and it sort of expands itself from there. Generally, that particular term, negro or negro, was just referencing people of a darker hue, black folks really in Africa. Now remember, prior to Europeans using race as a stratification, particular elemental classification, you were judged or classified by your nationality. So you may have heard in historical terms this notion of the Moors. Step aside, Moor, or somebody get those Moors. Talking about sort of the Moors from Africa. And so you were sort of labeled in particularly to where your nation was. And then race comes into play, and now we have black, white, so on and so forth. And the thing about the N-word is that it was unlike other derogatory terms, it was never designed to identify a group of people. It was designed to identify a sect of subhumans. So you could never, there's no racial or ethnic equivalent to the N-word for any other racial or ethnic group.
True.
Because the other language is still recognizing you in your identity. Ta-Nehisi Coates speaks at one point in time on this idea of white trash. He says white trash isn't the equivalent to the N-word. He says white trash just means that you didn't live up to your potential as a white person. You know, it's just reminding you that you should be higher than this. These other derogatory words for other races and ethnicities, which I won't use, acknowledge those individuals just as a separate classification. The N-word sees you as subhuman. Why do we and how do we know this? Well, we know that the Dred Scott decision in 1857, Justice Taney, in his opinion, states that there are no rules, there are no laws that a black man has, or no rights, excuse me, that a black man has that a white man is bound to respect. Arguing essentially that a black person trying to bring a case in front of the Supreme Court is no different than a chair or a table trying to bring a case from the Supreme Court. The N-word does not acknowledge a person. It acknowledges something that's subhuman. And so when we think about the history of it and some of the origins, it kind of is just, it is an extension of what was once just a classification of what it meant to be black or show up with blacker skin. was transformed later on into a derogatory term that was applied specifically first to Black people, and then a classification of what it meant to be subhuman, specific to Black people.
Wow.
Wow.
Now that makes sense as far as like, yeah, how we look at it or don't understand, I should say. And then when you look at it, from historical standpoint. And so one of the things that I'm wondering, and you had mentioned it, Dr. Robbins, as far as at a certain point in time, I think we got to get into it. Our brothers in the hip hop world, that's when it really started coming out, and they just started dropping it left and right, and they used it. They were saying that, hey, this is just a part of our culture and who we are and our story, and so we're going to use it. But at the same time, what's interesting, right, is as that genre, as we know as hip hop, right, got larger, and white audiences began to
Flock.
appreciate that music, which then put money, in the pockets of those artists. And that's what we wanted, right? We wanted a genre that was ours, that told stories, and then artists made money because we know a lot of other artists acculturated a lot of our stuff and made mad money off of it. So to have this, but then as non-people of color, or I'll say non-black folk for real, started listening to it, they're like, well, I want to sing the song, and I want to, it's in the song, so I can use it, right? And I know Dr. Robbins, Dr. Robbins, man, we go out to places and we do karaoke, he and I, and if people pick a certain song and that word's in there, I'm gonna share it, Dr. Robbins, but he'll walk out the room, especially a non-black person. And
trying to check myself.
Yeah, you're like, I know what the song is. I know they're gonna probably end up using it, and he'll walk out, and then he'll come back. But he just doesn't want to see that. But so, what's your thoughts, Dr. Robbins, on that whole genre thing, man? Because we hear, like I said, we hear the bros, saying, hey, it's just what it is.
Yeah, well, I walk out because I don't want to wind up tussling with somebody. I try to be the bigger man in those moments, and 99% of the time, it's just us in terms of Black folks in there, and folks aren't going to understand our plight. So I just make an executive decision there. The normalization of the word begins to date back before hip hop. Hip hop really globalized it in a way. It's sort of the way Michael Jordan globalized basketball. Hip hop certainly did that with the N-word to a degree. But this was a word that was being used in the Black community even during the days of enslavement. A piece of it is psychological. If this is what I'm calling you, then this is what I guess I am, and this is what you should think you are. But then it was an acknowledgement of, no, I am better than this, and now you're behaving like this thing here. And so it was almost a check for enslaved Black folks, and saying, you're showing up behaving in this way. If you ever seen the movie Glory, my favorite movie of all time, 1989, there's a scene later on when Denzel Washington is just picking on Andre Braugher's character, Thomas Searle, and finally Morgan Freeman's character pops in and breaks it up, and there's a little scuffle there. And Denzel says, like, N-word, better get your hands off me. And Morgan Freeman's like, N-word's here. Kind of schools him. He's like, you watch you calling that word. If anybody's that word, it's you. And he goes into like the details, because essentially you're behaving this way, you're acting this way, you're using this language, and that's not the language or the behavior of, I guess, what would be equivalent to a gentleman in a way, right? Which would be up for a different definition, different discussion. But what he knows is that this behavior putting on is the behavior of an N-word, and it's one that you're better than. So an element of it, of the normalization, comes psychological. But then we know it was tossed around in jest in the Black communities as a way to cope as well. And as we began thinking about the reclamation process of it, we know Dr. King would use it, James Baldwin would use it, Malcolm X would use it internally within the community,
right,
as a way to reclaim it, but also as a check on other folks, because again, you're behaving this way. You'll hear terms like coon, for example. You might hear, jigaboo, things of that nature that should trigger for you. Like, I'm not that. Let me behave differently. Let me show up differently. So that was a piece of the intent. And then when we get to hip hop, you said that you were talking about this notion of white folks began to appreciate the music, and I don't think that's the case. I don't think they ever appreciated the music. I think they valued or commodified the message. And the difference between the two is hip hop in its early iterations, specifically early '90s, was a story about the streets. It was born out of this rebellious movement that said, I'm sort of tired of having to go through this day to day as a Black person in these streets. I need you to hear my story.
Right.
And there's a reason why NWA, Biggie, Pac, these folks blew up, and sort of Public Enemy, Mos Def, Common, the conscious rappers kind of faded behind the scenes, because that's not the message white mainstream media wants you to hear about Black people. They want you to hear the violent element.
Right.
They don't want to hear the conscious element here, which shifts a little bit later when we get into the 2000s and early Kanye comes into the game and other folks like that who start pushing the narrative in a really high level. But early on, and even today, I would argue, right, the idea is still the same. I don't know how many of these white folks you're talking about would play hip hop at their weddings on behalf of their daughters or at their functions before they get going, as in an intentional way, like that's authentic to them, not in a way to kind of share a joke or sharing comedy.
Right.
So I don't think there was ever an appreciation for the music as it pertained to that. But hip hop does have a big role in normalizing the word, especially when we think about an individual's right to say it. And Mark Lamont Hill was once said, like, there were just some words that aren't designed for you, and he kind of gives an ode to like Lil' Kim. We all love Lil' Kim early, and she would spit, and then she would identify herself as the B word. And he was like, if you're a straight man and that line pops up, you skip it because that's not you, right? It's not talking about you. We talked just the other night, Jamal, about a song I was singing. You're like, you ever think about replacing that word? And I was like, well, it doesn't. It actually fits for the song where it's at, right? But the notion of replacing it goes back to our identities, and there's the message you're trying to share is the idea you were giving to me. Does that name that you're using here fit the message that you're trying to share and who you are? Is it authentic to you? And that's a piece of the discussion. And what the white folks, and maybe we'll go into this a little bit later, but what the white folks have to understand is that this word in this iteration is not for you. Although James Baldwin would argue it actually is. Maybe we'll talk about that later on, but I don't want to complicate it too early.
I don't get too deep on y'all. Hold up. Right? No, that's good. That's good. So it's interesting because I saw a TikTok of a clip of a man, and it might be the gentleman that you're talking about, was saying that, like, with the word, white folks may feel as if though we make and run everything, and now you want to tell us this is a word that we put upon you, and now we can't use it. So power, right, and authority. And what he was saying was that hurts their feelings. That, wait, there's something that I can't do? Hold on. No, I'm I am, superior. And so it sets them, it just hurts their feelings that, Black folks are saying, hey, no, you can't use that.
Well, what it does is it disrupts what we call white comfort.
Right.
And what white comfort is it's this reality, right? This theory, but this reality that everything we say, everything we do, each way we behave is designed to appease white comfort. In other words, when we decide to dress a certain way, if I went to work back in the day and what I came up with, like when I wore to high school, people wouldn't take me seriously. They see me as a threat. Do-rag hanging low, Jabot jeans, 5XT, 6X underneath that, so on and so forth. But all I'm doing is representing my environment, of which I was a product. But it makes the white people uncomfortable, so we make different decisions as we get older. My decision to put my hair back instead of wearing it down is to make white people comfortable. Not now, but I'm giving you examples here.
Right.
Right.
The way I choose to speak, the diction I use. I remember years ago, Damien, Damien, and another brother of ours were in the cafeteria, and this is in graduate school several years back, and we were just chopping it up, standard rapping, old school, black folks together, engaging. This white dude pops up and taps my guy on the back of the shoulder. My guy turns around. He's like, yeah, you know what I'm saying? Hey, how's everybody doing? On a dime. Because our African-American vernacular, our black English would have made that white dude uncomfortable. And unconsciously, he made the switch. No one asked him to, but unconsciously, he made the switch. And so telling white folks you can't use this word disrupts white comfort. Another element to this is a theory that has been posited by Dr. Shannon Sullivan, which is called ontological expansiveness. And what she says is white people unconsciously believe they have the right to race, space, and place. And when you tell a white person you cannot have access to this race, you can't have access to this space or access to this place, they feel othered, which is outside of the norm in a society that's designed for them to be primary. And so it's not just the N-word. It's anything that's black that white folks believe that they should have a right to. Music, property, bodies, ownership. It doesn't matter really what it is. And it's a really, really good example of, and you mentioned this earlier about this idea of, honestly, really, black people. And it's a really good example of anti-blackness and what that actually is. Because I tell folks often, like, when I say anti-blackness, I don't mean racism. When I say black people, I don't mean people of color. I mean black people.
Right.
I had on a shirt one day, actually. I don't think I've ever told you all this. I had on a shirt one day and I ran into the lovely lady of the house and we were chatting and she was like, I love that shirt. Where'd you get it? I go, I got it from a black owned business. I support the black owned. She goes, oh, Zion will love that shirt. He likes to purchase, people of color businesses. In my head, I'm like, I didn't say people of color. Right? I love her to death, of course. But it popped into my head. This discomfort around things that are Afrocentric predominantly because of its relationship to what it means to be whiteness. Right? What it means to be white and whiteness next to it. When I say black, I don't mean people of color. If I meant people of color, I would have said that. And so this notion about the N-word, sticking on topic, is liberally used or should be liberally used in the minds of other identities by all other races and ethnicities because it disrupts this notion of white comfort, which is something that we're supposed to be abiding to, but also because it's something trying to be reclaimed by the black community to take the power away from it, which flies in the face of what the intent of this country in many ways actually is as well.
It's interesting. So yeah, when you think about the moving into like a little bit of, so we're talking about, white folks feeling uncomfortable because they might be othered. How does it work, or do you look at it from the standpoint of Mexicans or Hispanic or Latinx using that term? How does that play in from that perspective?
I think the notion still applies. Student development theory and identity development theory would tell you that all races and ethnicities have sort of a development theory that falls within their own racial or ethnic identity. At the top of everybody's is what's called white identified. And so you have white folks who are white identified, Latino folks who are white identified, black folks who are white identified, but there is no black identified on it. That doesn't exist. So what James Baldwin tells us is that there's no such thing as being a white or a black professional. It's just being as white as you can be. It's his argument. Because every time we show up professional, it's very rarely a representation of who we actually are. It's us falling into white comfort to make sure folks are safe. And as we know about the color palette, the darker you are, the worse off you are in society in terms of perceptions. The lighter you are, the better. Now, Latino folks who are on the lighter end and who are just not my skin color, for example, fare better. I know Latino folks who are like, I identify as white.
Right.
And
Mm-hmm.
there's space for that in a society where you don't maybe not show up as dark as I am. The other element there is, and this is slightly off topic, but it's relevant, is when we think about races and ethnicities, Latino folks fall into the ethnicity category, which is why you don't necessarily see that on the census. You see like white, Hispanic,
Mm-hmm.
and so on and so forth, right? Um, well, and this is because sociology only recognizes 4 races: Black, Asian, Native, and white. And historically, Latino folks are a mix of Native American and white folks, well, really Spanish, but
Right.
European, so, and from that we get a Latino community as a result of, of the Tiano descent, which is indigenous.
Mm.
And so there's always been a space for Latinos in whiteness, because Latinos are birthed out of that. That includes Mexican, Chicano, so on and so forth. Black folks are othered to such a large capacity that if Black folks have ownership of that property, it's problematic. Latino folks, not so much. Right? We can make exceptions in a different way. Latino folks, in the eyes of society, on the come up, have a choice that they can make. Not this isn't true in reality. Let's be very clear. The system has already done this piece, but in the eyes of the system, have a choice you can make. You can go white Latino, or you can maybe go more traditional and more in tune to your heritage, and that's going to send a message. But that's a decision you get to make. I don't get to make that decision. That design's already been played out for me.
Right.
And the box has already been created, and it's just sort of steering me to it. Is the idea, and so other races, other ethnicities using the word, for me, the same rule applies. It's not yours to use. Why? Because if it's not used around you, or if it's used around you, it doesn't bother you.
Mm-hmm.
It's not offensive to you. So you can use it comfortably and not think twice about it, because you don't have a relationship to the word in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
But I do. So whether you're using it, or you're using it, or you're using it, or you're using it, I still have a similar impact, because it's designed to treat me as some human, something you can disassociate from.
Mm-hmm.
So true, so true. Zion, so why did you said as you were coming up that last couple of years you just fell back from using the term, and you say you matured, or becoming a young man up in here. But what made you begin to, when you're hearing all this from Dr. Robbins, like what made you kind of move in that direction? I mean, did any of this apply for you as you? Yeah, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but yeah, what was it?
Yeah, I think to be honest with you, I think I got checked by a black dude from the East Coast. He was visiting Phoenix, and he was an artist. He was a rapper that was out here, and we were talking, we're chopping it up, whatever the case may be. And he asked me about like, yo, what are you? Are you like Puerto Rican, Dominican? Like, what are you? Because that's the East Coast, right? And that's that's where you get, that's kind of flavors you get.
The only options,
right? Yeah, the only options for people that look like me. And I was like, nah, man, like I'm Blaxican. And at that time, I was using the word, frequently, whatever the case may have been. And he kind of looked at me sideways. He said, so you're Black and Mexican, and you feel like you could use that word? And I was like, yeah, why wouldn't I? He's like, well, because you're half Mexican, so like you don't really, kind of what Rod was talking about, Dr. Robbins, about, you can disassociate from the word, and he was kind of schooling me like that. He was giving me the history about what it was and what it is, and that kind of made me feel some type of way. And of course, at first, you're defensive when you're learning something new about yourself and your identity. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're giving the space. Yeah. Man, you don't know what you're talking about. You're from New York. You don't know nothing about being from the West Coast. You don't know about being in the Southwest. And I was like, first of all, you don't know me. But having time to like reflect on his words and him have that impact on me, I was like, you know what? Just understanding the history, and understanding a little bit more now, I don't want to use that word. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's nothing positive from that word, even though we try to spin it and yeah, that's my homie, that's my N word, yeah. It's like, but the connotation, like you're saying, Rod, like even though we're trying to leave it in a term of endearment, it still has that negative connotation to it. And I wouldn't call you something that's negative. You know, I don't call women B words because you're not that, right? And you'll never, I don't see you in that eyes, even if I'm saying that out of respect or trying to be like, oh yeah, that's my girl, that's my shawty, that's my, you know, B word. Like, nah, that's degrading. And that's the last thing I want to do to people and to myself. I feel like if I'm saying it to myself. And I kind of have this belief now of like looking at people as images of me. Like, you are me, like we are each other. You know what I mean? Like, you're just another, you know, we're here together. I don't want to degrade you, because by degrading you, I'm degrading me. And I like understanding from, you know, growing up in the household with my pops and my moms, understanding that words got power, you know, and choose your words wisely, because that's how you represent yourself, and that's how you represent your community, that and all that comes into it. So that's kind of, what Rod hit on right in that 20 minutes was everything that dude was telling me in like 5 minutes, and of course with the slang and like that and the fingers, you know what I'm saying? He had the fingers and he was going hard.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I think we've all had an experience of that nature, that sort of made us rethink our behaviors.
Right.
I agree with him to an extent, but in the eyes of society, that one drop rule still exists, and so you would be seen as the N-word without a doubt, and a lot of communities would problematize the decision that was made above you by your parents, saying, "How could you? Like, why would you even make this decision to produce a child and maybe contaminate his DNA in this way?" Right? This would be the old school way of thinking. Right. But the notion is, The Rock gets a lot of criticism for this. Dwayne Johnson, his dad is 100% black, and he doesn't, at least ostensibly, show out in any way, for the black community, as if, like Naomi Osaka, for example, who's also half black, but you can see she leans into her blackness in ways that might downplay her elements of being Japanese, but I'm sure she owns that as well. But you can tell she's Afrocentric for sure. We don't get that same vibe with The Rock, and he can make that call because the other half of him is Samoan. Right. And so that element of critique is valid, right? You could make these decisions, and if you're strong enough with it, nobody will question you because it's coming off in your expression and your behavior. But there is a reclamation element to it, which we mentioned a little bit earlier, that's important, and a piece of it's intentional, to keep it out of the hands of specifically white people, but other folks as well. Like, I am going to say this, and I'm going to make sure that you can't say it as well without consequences if you were to. Right. For me, hard R or A, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's the same word with the same intentionality, at least historically. And folks may have shifted it later on, and I've already separated myself from that at that point in time. But listen, I hadn't cursed since I was 13 years old. I tell people this all the time, and sometimes a little blown away. And the reason why, when I was up to 13, I was, because I grew up in the projects, and that's the way the environment was. Things were hot at the time. You're wrapping up with Biggie and Pac, and you're moving into Ja Rule and 50, and it's just hardcore rap, battle raps popping up. There's just, the messaging is what the messaging is. But I've always had, much like you, Z, I've always had my dad in the scene. Present, strong, black, and very, very stereotype breaking. And he never swore. To this day, never heard him swear. And my dad is 64, never heard him swear. And he and so I said to myself, this is my goal in life, is him. And if he can do this and command this element of respect without ever swearing, I can do that too. And I just tossed it out at that point in time, right? So my checking was less external, more internal. Right. And it wasn't around the N-word, but it was around derogatory language. And I think the other piece we want to recognize here too, and this is probably the most important piece of it, is there's a generational gap here that is really at the center of how we understand and interpret the ways in which this word is used and or could be used. In the 1960s and really in the 20th century, you're closer to the oppression, the overt oppression, than you are in 2023. Right. Brown v. Board, it rules school segregation unconstitutional in 1954. By 1960, you're only 6 years removed from that. And so a black person saying don't use that N-word lands a lot differently. when you're still trying to push through segregated schools, and you're still trying to make sense of these lynching policies that, or just these lynchings that are coming to you, and you're hearing stories from your brother, your sister, mother, one stage removed, not even your great grandfather, great grandmother, your older siblings. Like, here's what happened to me on my way to school.
Mhm.
Versus today, when you look around in any direction, you see folks who look like you across the board, not in great numbers. I don't want to romanticize it, but you'll find senators, you'll find representatives, you found a president, you find a vice president, that look like you, and you're like, oh, well, maybe this position we're taking is antiquated. Maybe it is an old way of thinking. Maybe race isn't as important as it once was, and that's the smokescreen. And so when we make arguments against the N-word, my point with this is we're so far removed from why that matters that it's tough to resonate with the young folks today. If the topic was on trans identity, I promise you it lands very differently.
For sure.
There's an immediate visceral reaction. And I'm not saying there shouldn't be. What I'm saying is there's a closer relationship in society to trans identity and some of the concerns around it than there is for the N-word and for Blackness specifically.
Yeah, I think the point you raised is really good. It was really interesting because I ended up creating a group with another teacher. His name is Mr. Teachea, great guy, man. And we were talking with the youth, and your point well taken. I realized in talking to them that they don't know the history and a lot of this stuff meaning the issues around race and Black folks and slaves and enslavement, and they know of it, but they don't know it like the way that those that were closer to the 60s, 70s, maybe 80s, right? To them, even hearing and learning about the word and what it means, they didn't even know from the get-go, to be honest. I was like, wow. But it's like, for them, you can almost equate it, and this is to your point, Dr. Robbins, man, is like, looking at World War II. Well, they're just like, that is so far, man. I have no idea what. And it's interesting too, because I think about like, then how do you get them to understand? Because now this isn't in one school, right? Well, this is probably an issue throughout the nation. And I know where we live, it's throughout a lot of different schools and districts itself. I know because and Z had kind of mentioned this, is that I was for a graduation. I went to a school, and I heard some refugees using the term, and they were yelling it across the and it was all different types of folks, like walking to get to their seats and everything like that. And he's yelling it to another of his homeboys, and then everybody can hear it. And I'm just like, man, like, what's going? And that again, now I can't speak for them, but I know they're also trying to figure out how to fit in and where do they belong, and because they may be African or Somalian or whatever it may be, but they're trying to figure out what's going on as far as identity, right? And that makes sense. It gets more complex for them because you're in adolescent ages, and so you're trying to figure out this one thing, and now you got to figure this out. But then they're using some of the terminology, right, that they may see on TV or in hearing music that makes it seem as if those acceptable.
Yes.
But for them, they may not even also understand and know because of the gap, like you were saying, as far as just being so far removed. It just blew me away, man. When I walked away, it was like, they just don't know. And so my question would then be, is it education? And I mean, educating, that's a lot of people to educate, which is what school's supposed to be doing. But then you see and know, Dr. Robbins, they don't want us talking about this at all. So then how are we going to, is the ship left the dock and we can't turn it around, or what's your thoughts?
It's always education. That's always the answer. Frederick Douglass will tell you that's the most powerful weapon a person can have. there's a reason why black folks were legally forbidden to learn how to read legally. The only racial group, by the way, or ethnic group to have a law in that particular way. Napoleon, literally, in the 1800s, said that his desire to halt or to dismantle black authority has nothing to do with money, but really has everything to do with his desire to prevent sort of the forward progress of black people. This is Napoleon talking when the uprising in Haiti happens and Toussaint Louverture overturns them. This is him talking. This is the European perspective of black people. Imagine, and then we have enslavers, kidnappers, using the Bible to justify enslavement. You have the folks they want to call founding fathers. I never use that term. They're just framers to me, who created this country and this constitution, the country on paper and the constitution, with 3 anti-black clauses in there to ensure that fugitive slave clause was in there. You can still import enslaved Africans up until 1808, and the 3/5 compromise, all in this document that's going to frame this country, and then subsequent laws as a result of it. That was designed specifically to keep black people down. N-word was used regularly. It was just defining what it meant to be an enslaved person. The most embarrassing punishment a white person could receive at that point in time was to work in the field with another black person. It was equivalent to hopping into the pen with your pigs or your hogs.
Wow.
And swimming around. That was embarrassing. And they're basically saying you're less than human in this way. Now imagine if black people knew that. If black folks had a relationship, and then what I said to you wasn't shocking. This is the things you didn't know.
Right.
Now imagine if black folks had just owned that in a different way. Owned, right, that the fact, that society is created this way to ensure that, black women remain the least likely to get married, and if so, the first divorce likely. To ensure that, single parent households is what we want in the black community, so we can dismantle it as far as we keep the fathers out. To know that Richard Nixon's plan was to drop crack into the black communities. Since you can't use the N-word anymore, we want to associate them with drugs so we can criminalize black people by way of criminalizing the drug. If people had access to this information, and this is what Florida's thinking and saying, they would begin to look at the world, especially the U.S., very differently.
You're right.
And more than that, excuse me. And more than that, they begin to own their blackness in a way that's a lot more proud. And I have a friend who was out here at one point in time, and I may have shared this offline with y'all before, but she's light skinned, half black, half white. Mom's from England. The dad's my color, but she is, light, like you've seen Melora, like Melora's color, maybe a little shade darker. Yeah. And she identifies with the LGBTQ community, and it was Pride Day last year, so around this time last year, and she went to work rainbowed out, as she should have, because that's how she identified. And then a Casual Friday popped up down the road. Her mom, white woman, got her like a Black Girl Power outfit, top and bottom. And I was like, this is Casual Friday. It's a perfect time to wear this. She froze up. She froze up and was like, I said, well, why not? She goes, well, in her response to me, I don't want to be too political. So what I hear from that is you're telling me that my identity is political. It's not real, or it's not tangible. It's just a talking point. Right. My own identity that I operate in day in and day out. And that is what lack of education, lack of understanding, lack of pride of your racial identity does to you. So I'm coming around to my point in a second, which is education is number one, but then there's an accountability component that's within it. And we need to be accountable to one another to such an extent where if we hear someone else using this word, we need to clip it. And if we're not at that particular part, if that's not our comfort zone, then not creating spaces of normalization for that word to exist. And a piece of the responsibility of the hip hop community, of some of the black bourgeoisie, if you will, and some of the other black folks who have power, is to make that message very clear. Because if folks know that it's off limits, they're more likely than not to keep it off limits. Right. And in many ways today, the only way you're not using that word, if you're a white person or a Latino person or Asian or whatever the case is is if you don't have that level of consciousness around the history of the word. Because
Right.
if you did, I have to imagine you would understand why you shouldn't be using it. So a long way around of saying education, but also accountability that comes from within to put the clamps on a word like that.
Yeah. No, yeah, man. Like that makes a lot of sense as far as even just sometimes the uncomfortability, and I appreciate where um she was coming from in the moment. And what I mean by appreciate is just that struggle, that challenge sometimes, right? That has been put before us. Because I sometimes even feel the same way, right? In certain spaces, like I I don't want to agitate, and that's unfortunate, right? That's not a good place to be.
No,
And
I get it though.
um, especially when, like you said, I walk around like this all day, every day.
Right.
And so am I a walking political issue? Which
Yes.
that's uncomfortable. Yeah, right. Yeah,
Yes.
I am.
Yeah. Every
Yeah,
time you walk into a space off of this SCOTUS hearing, folks are saying, I wonder how he feels about this. Oh,
right.
he's probably another one. Every time you walk into the workplace, back when you worked for somebody else, is he the diversity hire? Like, does he deserve to be here?
Right.
You have to wear that, both of y'all. I have to
Right.
wear that, and the white folks don't have to wear that.
Mm-mm.
And like, to your point, right? There's a lot of unlearning that needs to happen. What did Dr. Bell Hooks tell us before she passed away? White people worship at the throne of black mediocrity. What does that mean? It means that as a black professional, black person really, but in the context of the workplace, even in the classroom, as a black professional, you can be okay, ideally. That's the goal. You could also be good, so long as you play the game a certain way, but don't you dare be great.
Mhm.
The minute you strive for excellence, you become a problem, not just a threat, but a problem. And you disrupt white comfort. Can you
Right.
imagine if someone of my mentality was leading some of these Fortune 500s or was overseeing some of the white folks, they wouldn't know what to do with themselves.
Right.
They wouldn't know what to do. They'd be really, because I'm gonna lay it out differently, and I'm gonna center blackness, and that's really, really uncomfortable because it's not commonplace.
Mm-hmm.
And white folks have the privilege, the absolute privilege of showing up for the three of us when it's hot, and we appreciate that, but then going home and just taking that outfit off.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
If we wind up in the same situation, they're getting bailed out. Then they get in
Right.
the conversation saying, hey, you're better than this. Don't do that. You have this particular piece set up. Not us. We're in there for long term. And where does this come from? And you've seen this in my presentation, Jamal. 1640, John Punch. He and two other white guys run away from a Virginia plantation. This is the colony of Virginia at this point in time. Plantation. From escaping from their indentured servitude. Indentured servitude is the base form of enslavement, which comes with a contract essentially, or a shelf life. Yeah, 2 or 3 years, you're indentured servitude. Then you become part of society at a low class, likely, but you get to be a part of society, have an element of freedom, or dare I say liberation. That's a piece of it. John Punch, a black man, and two other white guys fled from the Virginia colonies. They got caught, came back, and stood trial before the magistrate. The magistrate handed down the ruling. The two white guys, you get an additional 2 to 3 years to your sentence. John Punch, you get life. And 1640, I educate people, is when indentured servitude ends and chattel slavery begins. Chattel slavery meaning slavery as property, specific to black people. A lot of folks make the argument that, there was slavery all over the world, and that's true. I second that. But chattel slavery, slavery as property, is uniquely American and specifically designed for Africans and those of African descent. Nobody else. Specifically designed for Africans and those of African descent. Nobody else. And the things we see today in this conversation is a direct product of that relationship. If we have access to this information early, then we shift the ways our young people are thinking about blackness. The problem is there's too much stick on the carrot that's allowing us to say, oh well, there's still this opportunity. I still got more room to get here and achieve this element of whiteness. But as I told you already, Baldwin said, there's no such thing as you as a professional. It's just being as white as you can be. Imagine what that looks like with you and your identity centered in the middle of it. And again, the core of it is it just doesn't land the same way as it once did because folks are seeing too many people of color, too many Black folks, and this is a positive thing, succeeding in society. That's
Right.
good, but it takes you away from the systemic component that says now that we've given you a couple of carrots here, I can hopefully get you to understand why race-based admissions doesn't matter anymore. Now that we've had a Black president in office, hopefully now I can get you to understand why, we can have a Donald Trump in here and we're in a post-racial society. And that if people are saying these inflammatory things, it's just because it's merit-based, has nothing to do with you. Now that we've given you several millionaires and a couple of billionaires, I hope you understand why you can say we're in an equal playing field.
Yeah.
But those millionaires and billionaires are all in the entertainment industry. They're not thought leaders.
No.
The millionaire isn't, Obama.
For sure.
But there's not a series of those folks. You could consider Oprah if you wanted to, just the nature of what she does. But, and you could make arguments for some artists as well. But my point is you don't have thought leaders who are out here that are large scale moguls in the way that you have with the white community. And that allows the power to stay in one place.
Wow.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. And I think for me, the whole, idea of using the word goes back to kind of what Z said and understanding. I understood, man, it was in high school. I was a predominantly white school, and I heard them using this term, against us Black folks that were in the school. And there's only, I think, 5 of us there. And then I realized like sometimes we were using it with one another. And I was like, but I don't look at you like that, the way that but I'm still using the same word. And, began to study a little bit of really what, that was all meaning and the meanings behind it, and realized I don't want to be associated with that. That is not me. And it was challenging because I was hearing Biggie, Pac, all of them in the beginning, kind of using these words. And I was like, well, but they hardcore, but I think also that's a type of mentality. And I say this with much love to them, is understanding that I think they're unintentionally also still holding themselves down and back. Even though they think that they are moving themselves forward. Again, words matter, words have power, and there's things that you do and put in place intentionally and sometimes unintentionally that unconsciously or subconsciously still hold you down.
There's always going to be, at least for the most part, this complicated relationship to it, right? You have my take on it. I agree with what you're all saying in terms of my personal convictions around the word regarding whether or not I would use it. And the answer is no. But I also find value in the intentionality behind the political component of it, which is I'm going to use this inflammatory word that I know you want to use, and I'm going to check you every time you try. I find value in reclaiming a word that was designed to classify you as subhuman and use as a way to lift you up beyond humanity, right? So the old God body approach, if anybody, Z, you're too young for this. You might remember, Jamal, but it was really Northeast and specific to New York in a way. But if you listen to any old Nas albums, Illmatic, of course, is one I recommend. It was written, everything in there is peace, God. What's the deal, God? Everything good, God, right? And so, it was God body, and everyone shout out Allah. In one way, it was a representation of Muslim, but also Allah, ALLAH, arm, leg, arm, head, one entity, one body. God body is the idea. And so it was the N-word, and it was lifting you above humanity into God's sphere.
Yep.
I'm here for that. Like I'm here for it. But context matters. Context matters. Am I gonna sit next to this disconscious white person and have the N-word going? No. Because that's just gonna normalize it for you. It's like watching the Family Guy parody and them saying, see, I knew it. I knew that was true. Right? Or Dave Chappelle stand up. I'm not watching that with you.
Right.
But
Right.
can I can I sit back and listen to the N word being used in a stand up special with Kevin Hart
Yeah.
or Mike Epps, or listen to Biggie and Pac around y'all? Yes, I could, because y'all
Right.
get it consciously differently.
Right.
And
Right.
you
Right.
understand the context and the history. And if you didn't before, you do now, right?
Right.
Around right, why the intent behind these folks saying it. The concern, in which what the meat of this discussion is, these youngins don't have that background.
Right.
Right.
So they're saying it free from education. And that's where it becomes scary, because it sets a new normal that is not grounded in a why. I'll give you this. This is the last example I'll give you really quickly to kind of help tie this home. There is an old social experiment, and I showed this in one of my workshops. There's an old social experiment that people have seen called the 5-monkey social experiment. Whether it's legit or not is up for discussion, but it makes a strong point, where a scientist takes 5 monkeys and puts them in a cage, puts a ladder in there, puts a banana on top. So naturally, the monkeys gravitate towards a banana. And Charles Darwin teaches us that the survival of the fittest, only one monkey is going to get that banana. One monkey gets it. The scientists take cold water and soak the other 4 monkeys. So they repeat the process again. Put a banana on top of the ladder. Same monkeys go for it, but one monkey has a little bit more pep in their step because they weren't soaked with water. It's the same one from before. Goes up to the top, gets the banana. Scientist soaks all 4 monkeys again, who didn't get the banana, in freezing cold water. Repeat the process. Put the banana up top. Now the monkey's like, hey, goes to get it. The 4 other monkeys jump in front and severely beat that monkey down physically. So then the scientist takes out one of those aggressive monkeys who were beaten down on the victim, puts in a brand new fresh monkey. So you have 3 aggressive monkeys, 1 victim, and 1 brand new monkey who's clueless. Repeat the process. Put the banana on top of the ladder. Which monkey do you think goes for the banana?
The new one.
The new one goes for the banana. What happens?
He gets beat.
Yeah.
He gets beat by who?
The 3 that were in there.
And the 4th.
Oh, and
the victim. Right.
Mm.
And the victim jumps in. Why do you think the victim jumps in?
Because he knew he was going to get beat down if he bitten by the other 3.
Gets beat down if he goes for it. And there's safety in numbers, the victim mentality. There's a new norm that has been created.
Yeah.
You understand?
Right.
Then they repeat the process, take out one of the aggressive monkeys, bring in a brand new one, and they repeat it until you have 5 brand new monkeys who are hyper aggressive and have no idea why.
That's what you're saying. Yeah.
And if you were to ask them, why are you behaving? Why are you so amped for? They would say, well, that's just the way I thought things were. Right. That's how we as Black people are today. We just show up and behave. Like, why are you using that word? Well, I just, why are you dressing like this? Pick up a book, find out the history, and I guarantee it. I have a strong conviction that would suggest that if you have access to the information, you sacrifice the excuse. That's my belief. But that takes work.
You got to say that again.
If you have access to the information, you sacrifice the excuse. Right? The opposite isn't misinformation; it's the excuse. And
I like it.
It takes commitment. It takes work. And if folks, again, bringing it back home, right? If folks understood why it was important to push back on this work, to put it to put it into context, then I'd like to believe that people would begin making a different decision.
Man,
I like that.
That's a lot. We got. That's some good stuff. That's some good stuff, man.
I think for me,
a lot.
This helped me to reaffirm why I don't use it and why I need to do a better job of, like you said, Dr. Robbins, clipping it when I do hear it or see it. And I wonder, in closing, is there a way to do it and clipping the word that, how do you, what do you say? What do you do?
You educate and you educate appropriately and accordingly. If I'm talking to grown men who've been around the block, I can approach the conversation a certain way. I can lean on the example that I just gave, God Body and Nas, and imagining that there's a connection to hip hop there. And if it is, it's going to be 90s based. If I'm talking to one of the youths of today, I'm going to find a different way to connect it. I'm going to get into their world a little bit. What if you heard this word, right? Maybe it's the F word or another word for a different racial or ethnicity. How does that make you feel? Why do you think that makes you feel that way? And can you imagine why maybe someone who looks like me might feel that way over in this word? And I meet them where they are, and we would have that conversation. The key to discussion around DEI, and it's funny because I was talking about this yesterday. I just outlined my masterclass on talking through DEI, and all this will be in there. And the key to working through DEI and to having these conversations around justice is to remember that it's not a push conversation, it's a pull. What I mean by that is I'm not here to dump info on you. I believe it's already there. I'm just going to pull it from you.
Right.
It just takes the right person to have that conversation. And so if you're 15, I'm not going to talk to you like you're 25 or 35. I'm going to meet you where you are and have a conversation, because I believe that if you have the information, you won't have the excuse. So I'm not going to force you to buy into what I'm saying. I'm going to let the universe do what it does.
And that's dope. That's dope. I think that it's definitely something that needs to continue to have, talked about. And that's exactly what I did with that class, and being able to hear their experiences and what it meant to them was so enlightening. And so meeting them where they are, and like you said, not beating them over the head about it, but just saying like, hey, well, let's just have a conversation about it. And sometimes it can be a longer conversation than maybe, some of our listeners may be willing to do. But at least planting the seed of, I'm coming out of this for myself personally, again, reaffirmed that we just shouldn't be using this word, and it needs to be eradicated. That will not happen, I know, but if we can get people having this conversation, hopefully by listening to this and having some education, that maybe they'll talk to their homeboys, their clique, their crew, their sisters, brothers, uncles, aunts. Hopefully it'll just stimulate that. And we just begin the process now. And for our listeners, Dr. Robbins used the word DEI, just in case you don't know what that is: diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I don't know, Z, any final thoughts, or how you feeling?
I mean, I can already see the comment section already asking about like when we inviting Dr. Robbins again to have a even further discussion. But I want Dr. Robbins to also plug what he does because
we didn't do that in the beginning.
Because he educates, man, and if you want more education, want to get educated a little bit more, this your man right here. This is the main squeeze. So I'll let him tell everybody where they can get at you.
Yeah, man. I mean, I appreciate that. Really quickly, I am the founder and owner of an organizational development consultancy called Visceral Change, also based here in Tucson, Arizona. We work nationally and internationally with organizations and institutions across the board. And what we do, man, is we try to help folks center their professional frameworks around diversity, equity, and inclusion, mission statements, vision statements, handbooks. But more than that, we recognize that in order to shift the system, you got to change the hearts and minds of the people as well, which is why we have these kinds of intentional conversations. It's not enough to say, here's where we're going. We got to make sure that we all understand the why behind it before we start debating the how. And in addition to that, I'm a professor as well as organizational theory at Vanderbilt University, and I'm also a constitutional scholar, which is why you heard me tie in some of that, the cases and some of that history there. So any avenue I can use to meet you where you are to get this conversation going, I'm happy to do so.
So how do they find you though, man?
Yeah, www.visceralchange.org is the website. Visceral Change is the hashtag, whether it's, my handle at Visceral Change, hashtag Visceral Change. And then my personal handle is at the Consultant Professor. So feel free to find me there as well.
Exactly. I was going to say, you're going to drop that in the comments, Z, so that people can make sure they spell that right, make sure they can get to him directly, because I don't want no mistakes. I want to make sure that they can find this brother when they need to, because I got it, and I want to say this because this is this is an audio and video, and it'll be archived for probably many years to come. But having encountered Dr. Robbins and being able to call him a close friend means the world to me, because he's educated me in so many different ways. And opening my mind to different things and different perspectives. And it's good to have a Black man as a brother and friend and colleague. and who can uplift you when you're feeling down, because he's been there for me during those times, and also just help push me forward when I needed that. So this cat is the real deal. He's honest. He does have a little accent sometimes, but
That's
hey,
after a Buffalo Tracer too.
and if y'all ever want to get at us and sing with us, man, definitely, you can hit us up on that too. But Dr. Robbins, I want to just give you your flowers, man. Love you for real, man. Much love.
I appreciate y'all, man.
All right, Z, you want to get us out of here, man?
Yeah, man. I'm gonna get us out of here. You can follow us at the Up to It podcast everywhere. We also got a new website. We got a website up and running. We got that on there. If you want to book some, if you want to just be like, yo, I like Z and what Jamal got working and what they're doing, you can get at us. Maybe you're going through something with family wise, and you're like, I don't know how to spell virtual change, and you're like, Z, just hit us up in the website, and we got you. And it'll also be in the description below. You got it. We got you. You know what I'm saying? But yo, definitely follow us there. But we're gonna get up out of here, man. Dr. Robbins, thank you once again. We really do appreciate you, man. Taking time to come on this pod. So we're gonna get out of here, and we'll see y'all on the next one.
We out.